As Israel cuts off northern Gaza from essential supplies, it continues to strike Palestinian civilians whilst demanding their displacement. But the attacks such as those on Al-Aqsa Hospital in central Gaza on Sunday night show there's nowhere safe to go. The sight of a patient on an IV drip burning to death in the flames of an airstrike on the tents of refugees will be the abiding image of this genocide. So the 400,000 or so civilians left without food or supplies in northern Gaza are increasingly subject to airstrike, artillery and small arms fire from Israeli forces. 11,500 children killed in Gaza in a year. That's one classroom full of children every day for a single year. And in Lebanon we see Israeli strikes killing civilians, but now we hear, in addition to invading UNIFIL posts, there are reports of attacks of UNIFIL forces of a chemical nature. As to UNIFIL, I acknowledge the Foreign Secretary's call to Israel and all parties to uphold their obligations, but repeatedly calling on Israel to uphold their obligations has no impact. Unless forced to change, Israel will continue to commit further outrages and breaches of international law in the Lebanon, in West Bank, and its starvation and targeting of civilians in Gaza. And even Lord Cameron has today talked about individual sanctions for far-right Israeli ministers. Will the Foreign Secretary consider those and other measures? A partial arms embargo has not stopped the attacks on civilians either. Surely that has to be extended. The government told me in a written answer that the US government manages the sale of F-35 aircraft to Israel and the F-35 global supply chain. So in the interest of protecting civilians in Gaza, I ask the government to open discussion with the US to remove Israel from the end-use destinations of the F-35 global supply chain. There are many partners for peace in the region whose efforts are rejected by Israel, but the UK has an important role to play. So given recognition of Palestine is a prerequisite for peace and not a byproduct of it, is it not now time to join the global majority in doing so?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the number of important points that he made. First of all, he referred to footage which has been circulating widely, and this is one of many instances of very disturbing footage that many of us will have seen and many of our constituents as well. Of course, the government looks very closely at all of those reports. We are concerned by all reports, and we will continue to take very seriously our responsibilities when it comes to conducting IHL assessments in that case, or indeed in relation to any other such case. My honourable friend also mentioned the UK government's position in relation to UNIFIL. Actually, the UK government could not have been clearer on this. We were appalled to...
The Minister quite rightly acknowledges the abominable situation faced by people in Gaza and in southern Lebanon at the present time. The fundamental question asked by the member for Middlesbrough was simply this: if we condemn the acts that have been undertaken by the Israeli Defence Force, the killing of civilians, the killing of people in hospitals and schools, then why are we still supplying the weapons to Israel which enables them to undertake these military activities?
Minister.
Well, the UK government has been absolutely clear in the repeated messages that we have conveyed to Israeli counterparts to take all possible steps to avoid civilian casualties, to allow unfettered aid into Gaza through all land routes, and to provide the UN and its humanitarian partners the ability to operate effectively. We've also been very clear, as I've said many times during this statement, around attacks on UNIFIL. He is well aware, I believe, of the decisions taken by the UK government in respect of the arms export regime, and I will not go over that again because we have debated that already in this House.
Leila Moran.
Mohammed is a consultant NHS surgeon. In fact, he was mine when I was in hospital with sepsis just a few months ago. His parents are in Jabalia refugee camp. They are elderly. His father has no colon. His mother has diabetes. They cannot move. There is nowhere safe for them to move. And yet, if they tried to move, he tells me that everything is being shot by drones and that there are bodies strewn in the street. Will the Minister impress upon the Israeli government that Mohammed's parents, the sick, the elderly, and those who have stayed to care for them, are not legitimate targets of war, no matter how many times they might have been told to move? And furthermore, If arrest warrants are issued for Netanyahu, as has been trailed, will this government support it?
Can I just say this is a very important issue? I really do want to get everybody in, but you're going to have to help each other, and I don't want people to miss out. So please, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're very much aware that now over 85% of Gaza is under evacuation orders. That's causing chronic overcrowding, with people desperately seeking shelter. And last month, the number of humanitarian trucks that entered Gaza was actually the lowest we've seen since the start of the year. So she asked about our message to Israel and the representations that we've made. We call on Israel to take all possible steps to avoid civilian casualties, to allow unfettered aid into Gaza through all land routes, to respect the mandate of the UN, and to provide the UN and its humanitarian partners the ability to operate effectively. And that is particularly in relation to the most vulnerable, as she rightly mentioned.
My right honourable friend speaks with great eloquency about how completely wrong it is for UN peacekeepers to be attacked in the way that they have been. They put their bodies in the line, keeping warring parties apart, and have been able to maintain peace, rough peace, on the blue line for nearly 18 years before this conflict began. But may I ask, is it possible for us to go further than just to condemn it? Given that there are 10,000 peacekeepers for UNIFIL from 50 countries, the full complement ought to be 15,000. Italy provides 1,000, France and Spain over 600, Ireland nearly 400, Germany over 100, whilst we provide 1. I wonder if it might be possible for the government to reconsider the number of peacekeepers that are sent to UNIFIL and whether Britain could make a bit bigger contribution.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to welcome my honourable friend to her rightful place as chair of the Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. She is right that the role of UNIFIL is absolutely crucial. It already was incredibly important, of course, in southern Lebanon, but it's now even more important given the escalating situation that we see in the region. And the UK fully supports UNIFIL's work. Of course, we keep our support for all UN agencies continuously under review. That applies to UNIFIL as well. And I just realised that I failed to respond to the question around the Kelowna report, in relation to another UN agency, UNRWA. Just to be clear that the UK has engaged substantively on the recommendations from the Kelowna report. I've done it myself, both with General Lazzarini and with his deputy as well. And we're continuing to work on this, and that's included financial support towards implementing the Kelowna report.
Does bombing a hospital and having patients on IV drips burned to death in their beds constitute a war crime?
As I mentioned previously, the UK government is looking very carefully at all reports. There has, of course, been considerable footage that is extremely disturbing, not just the footage that many of us have seen to which he refers, but of other types as well. Of course, it's very important that the UK government looks at this carefully, makes proper assessments. There is a legal regime for doing this, and this UK government takes those legal responsibilities seriously because we know the impact that they can have.
In the last few days alone, Israel has burned people alive by bombing a tent camp at a hospital, killed children after bombing a school, and fired on UN peacekeepers. We've had a year of this. As a Palestinian lawyer told me, Britain knows exactly what to do because it rightly did it against Russia after its illegal invasion of Ukraine, imposed sanctions. Sanctions on arms, sanctions on trade, sanctions on officials. That's how to get Israel to stop doing what it's doing. So when will Israel be held to the same standards for its war crimes and violations of international law?
It is indeed very important that the UK takes its responsibilities seriously. He talked about some of the reports that we have seen. Of course, the UK government is looking very closely at those reports and really determined to ensure that we play our part in ensuring that international law is upheld. He talked about sanctions policy. As I mentioned before, we will always keep that under review, but he should be aware that the UK has, for example, already sanctioned 8 people responsible for perpetrating and inciting human rights abuses. That was against Palestinian communities in the West Bank. We will continue to keep these issues under review.
The UN says it's not been allowed to deliver essential supplies, including food, since October. Mr. Speaker, last week, 15 UK and Irish humanitarian organisations warn the UK is failing to uphold international law, and without bold and immediate action from the UK, Palestinians in northern Gaza are facing an imminent existential threat. Please, Minister, give us more details on exactly what this government is doing to make sure the retired general's surrender or starve strategy isn't being implemented. We need to do more than just debate in this chamber.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her remarks, and again I would want to congratulate her for her leadership of the Select Committee on Development. I think this government has shown that we absolutely are determined to play our part with UK leadership on these issues, which are of such desperate concern to our constituents and, of course, to the whole world. That has meant there's been serious engagement at every level, including within the first days of the new government coming into office, engagement at the highest level from the Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, myself, right across government with our counterparts, whether those be the Palestinian Authority, the Lebanese government, of course, also the Israeli government, other regional actors, the US more broadly. We are determined to ensure that the ceasefires that are so desperately needed are put into place and that we play our part in facing up to the humanitarian crisis that we see unfolding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, has said Israel has perpetrated a concerted policy to destroy Gaza's healthcare system as part of a broader assault on Gaza, committing war crimes and the crime against humanity of extermination, which with relentless and deliberate attacks on medical personnel and facilities. The United Nations does not make these claims lightly. And so can I ask the Minister whether these assessments have also been made by our government's legal teams, and in light of this, what further actions have been taken to protect international law, life itself in Gaza, and human rights?
Not quite the example, Minister.
First of all, she mentions the critically important issue of healthcare in Gaza. That has been of considerable concern to the UK government. That's why we announced £5.5 million worth of new medical aid to UK Med for operating their field hospitals in Gaza. I met personally with UK Med to understand more about their response to ensure that we were playing our part. It's also why we supported UNICEF as well around supporting vulnerable families in Gaza with water, healthcare and specialist treatment. And of course, when it comes to international humanitarian law, we take that responsibility very seriously to ensure that we are conducting the assessments that are needed legally.
While the situation in Gaza is beyond devastating, there have been over 1,400 settler attacks in the West Bank. The Minister says she's keeping sanctions under review. I ask her, what is it going to take to impose sanctions on those settlers, but also the settler organisations that are funding these settlers to carry out these atrocious attacks?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue, but the UK government's position could not be clearer here. Settlements are illegal under international law. They present an obstacle to peace and they threaten the physical viability of a two-state solution. And during his visit in July, the Foreign Secretary met with Palestinians displaced in the West Bank. He was horrified to hear of the acts of violence that have been carried out by settlers. And the UK government has strongly condemned settler violence and insightful remarks, as we talked about before. And we urge Israel to take greater action to hold violent settlers to account and clamp down on those who seek to inflame tensions.